In a world that never truly goes quiet, Marcus Aurelius would recognize our struggle immediately. He ruled an empire surrounded by war, betrayal, illness, and constant demands on his attention, yet in the private pages of his meditations, he wrote with a calm that feels almost impossible today. Notifications buzz, opinions shout, crises multiply, and the mind is pulled in 1,000 directions at once. Mental clarity feels rare, fragile, almost luxurious. But for Marcus Aurelius, clarity was not a luxury. It was a discipline. It was a daily act of inner resistance against noise. Imagine Marcus at dawn, not in a palace of peace, but in a military camp. The air is tense, messengers wait, decisions will shape lives. Yet before he speaks to anyone, he speaks to himself. He reminds his mind of what truly matters. Not the noise of the crowd, not the fear of judgment, not the pressure of events, but the condition of his own reason. This is where Stoic clarity begins, not by silencing the world, but by ordering the mind. The Stoics never promised a quiet world. They promised a steady mind within it. Marcus Aurelius understood that confusion does not come from events themselves, but from the way we allow them to occupy our inner space. When everything feels loud, the Stoic does not fight the noise directly. He steps back and asks a simple question. What part of this is actually under my control right now? This question alone cuts through chaos like light through fog. In noisy times, the mind tries to do everything at once. It wants to react to every headline, every opinion, every emotional signal. Marcus would call this a scattered soul, a soul that has forgotten its center. He wrote that the mind becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. If you allow noise to dominate your thinking, your inner world begins to resemble the outer chaos. Clarity begins the moment you refuse to let everything in. There is a powerful, Stoic image that Marcus returns to again and again, the image of the inner citadel, a stronghold inside you that cannot be shaken unless you open the gates yourself. No matter how violent the storm outside, the citadel remains still. Mental clarity is not about escaping life, it is about returning to this inner place of command. When you do this, the noise does not disappear, but it loses its authority over you. Marcus Aurelius did not chase peace by changing circumstances. He cultivated peace by training perception. When something disturbed him, he did not ask why the world was so unfair. He asked why his judgment was so quick to panic. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of being a victim of noise, you become an observer of it, and the observer always has more clarity than the one who is emotionally entangled. In modern life, noise often comes disguised as urgency. Everything feels important. Everything feels immediate. Marcus would warn us that urgency is one of the greatest enemies of reason. He believed that most things do not require instant emotional reaction. They require patience, examination, and restraint. When the mind slows down, clarity naturally returns, not because the problem vanished, but because the mind is no longer rushing toward confusion. Storytelling was never separate from philosophy for Marcus. His life itself was the lesson. Despite being surrounded by flatterers and critics, he chose to listen more to his own reason than to public opinion. He knew that the loudest voices are rarely the wisest. Today, this lesson feels more relevant than ever. Social noise trains us to think loudly but not deeply. The Stoic strategy is the opposite. Think deeply, speak sparingly, and act deliberately. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that clarity is not found by consuming more information. It is found by filtering what deserves your attention. He would say that your time and focus are among your most valuable possessions. To give them away carelessly is to live in permanent distraction. When you begin to guard your attention, mental clarity stops being accidental and starts becoming intentional. In the end, Stoic clarity is an act of inner leadership. Marcus led an empire, but first he led his own mind. He knew that a ruler who cannot govern himself will be ruled by fear, impulse, and noise. The same is true for us. When you reclaim authority over your thoughts, the world does not become quieter, but you become clearer. And in noisy times, clarity is a form of strength. Mental clarity for Marcus Aurelius was never a one-time achievement. It was a practice renewed each day, sometimes each hour. He understood that the mind naturally drifts toward distraction and emotional excess if left unattended. That is why his writings often sound like reminders rather than discoveries. He was not teaching the world, he was correcting himself. This is an important lesson for us. Clarity is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you return to, again and again, especially when the noise grows louder. Marcus often wrote about how quickly the mind becomes overwhelmed by impressions. A harsh word, an unexpected event, a troubling thought can all rush in at once and demand a reaction. In noisy times, the danger is not the impression itself, but the speed with which we surrender to it. The Stoic response is to slow the moment down, to insert reason between stimulus and reaction. In that small space, clarity is born. Imagine a moment when bad news reaches you. The modern instinct is immediate analysis, emotional spiraling, and public expression. Marcus would pause. He would remind himself that what he received was only an impression, not the truth itself. He believed that the mind must examine what it perceives before agreeing with it. This examination is the heart of Stoic clarity. When you stop accepting every thought as a fact, the mental noise begins to lose its grip. There is a quiet strength in Marcus Aurelius that comes from restraint. He did not deny emotions, but he refused to let them rule. He believed that reason was the ruling faculty of the soul, and that its job was to keep order. In chaotic times, emotions multiply quickly. Fear feeds on uncertainty, anger feeds on confusion, but clarity feeds on discipline. The Stoic does not suppress feeling, he guides it. Marcus also warned against mental clutter created by unnecessary concerns. He wrote about how people exhaust themselves, worrying about reputation, future outcomes, and the opinions of others. None of these, he argued, improve the present moment. They only fragment attention. When the mind is divided, clarity cannot exist. Stoic clarity requires simplicity, doing one thing at a time, thinking one thought at a time, living fully in the moment you are actually in. Noise also enters through comparison. Marcus lived among powerful men, ambitious generals, and political rivals, yet he constantly reminded himself that external status meant nothing to the quality of one's character. In modern life, comparison is amplified endlessly. Other people's success, opinions, and lifestyles are pushed into our war. Every day. The Stoic strategy is to withdraw your sense of worth from comparison and return it to conduct. Are you acting with reason? Are you acting with integrity? These questions cut through noise more effectively than any external validation. One of Marcus Aurelius' most profound insights is that the mind becomes tired not from action, but from resistance to reality. When we argue internally with what is already happening, mental fatigue follows. Clarity comes from acceptance, not resignation, but a clear-eyed recognition of what is. Once reality is accepted, the mind becomes free to act wisely within it. This is how the Stoic stays calm while others are overwhelmed. He often reminded himself of the temporary nature of all things, not in a morbid way but as a grounding truth. The arguments, the scandals, the anxieties that seem so loud now will soon fade. This perspective shrinks noise to its proper size. When you remember how small most disturbances are in the long arc of time, clarity returns naturally. Urgency dissolves, proportion is restored. Marcus Aurelius believed that a clear mind is a moral responsibility. Confusion leads to poor judgment, and poor judgment harms both the self and others. This is why he treated inner clarity as a duty, not a personal preference. In noisy times, choosing clarity is an ethical act. It allows you to respond rather than react, to understand rather than attack, to lead rather than follow chaos. As the world grows louder, the Stoic does not shout back. He becomes quieter inside, not passive, not detached, but grounded. Marcus would say that the greatest refuge is not a physical place, but a well-ordered mind. When you cultivate this inner order, noise loses its power, and in that calm center, reason speaks clearly again. Marcus Aurelius understood that the greatest threat to mental clarity is not chaos itself, but habit of mental wandering. When the mind drifts without direction, it becomes vulnerable to every external disturbance. He often warned himself not to let the soul be carried away by random thoughts. In noisy times, this advice feels almost prophetic. The modern mind is rarely still. It jumps from concern to concern, rarely finishing one thought before being pulled into another. Stoic clarity begins with bringing the mind back under command. For Marcus, attention was sacred. Whatever you give your attention to, you give a portion of your life. He believed that a person becomes shaped by what they repeatedly focus on. If your attention is constantly absorbed by outrage, fear, or meaningless distraction, your inner world slowly mirrors that chaos. This is why Stoicism emphasizes conscious attention, not forceful concentration, but deliberate awareness. You choose what deserves your mental energy, and you release the rest. He wrote that people seek retreats in the countryside, by the sea, or in the mountains, yet the most powerful retreat is available at any moment. It exists within the mind itself. This inner retreat does not require silence around you, it requires order within you. When the world feels overwhelming, Marcus would withdraw inward, not to escape responsibility, but to regain clarity before returning to action. There is a subtle danger Marcus identified that is especially relevant today: the illusion of productivity through constant mental activity. The mind feels busy but not effective. Thoughts pile up without direction. Opinions are formed without reflection. Marcus would remind us that clarity comes from depth, not volume, thinking less but thinking better. When you reduce unnecessary mental movement, insight emerges naturally. He also spoke about the importance of aligning thought with nature. For the Stoics, nature meant rational order. Every thing has a function. Everything moves according to cause and effect. When the mind fights this order, confusion arises. When it aligns with it, clarity follows. In practical terms, this means accepting that not everything will go your way, not everyone will agree with you, and not every problem will be solved immediately. Once the mind stops demanding perfection from reality, it begins to think clearly again. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that other people act according to their understanding, not yours. This insight alone dissolves much mental noise. Anger, frustration, and resentment often come from expecting others to think and behave exactly as we do. Marcus rejected this expectation. He trained himself to see human behavior as a natural phenomenon, like weather. This perspective removes personal offense and restores calm judgment. In noisy times, the temptation is to harden the mind or become cynical. Marcus chose a different path. He believed clarity and kindness could coexist. A clear mind does not become cold, it becomes fair. It judges without hatred and understands without surrendering reason. This balance is difficult, but it is the mark of Stoic maturity. You do not lose clarity by being compassionate. You lose it by being emotionally reactive. He also emphasized the danger of postponing inner work. Waiting for life to become calmer before seeking clarity is a mistake. Life never truly becomes calm. Marcus wrote these thoughts while facing plague, war, and political pressure. If clarity was possible then, it is possible now. The Stoic strategy is to train the mind in the midst of noise, not after it disappears. Marcus Aurelius believed that every moment offers a choice: to be dragged by impressions or to stand firm in reason. This choice may seem small, but repeated over time, it shapes the entire character. Mental clarity is not dramatic. It is quiet, consistent, and disciplined. And in a world addicted to noise, this quiet discipline becomes a powerful form of freedom. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the mind becomes disturbed not by events, but by the opinions we form about them. This idea sounds simple, yet it is one of the most difficult disciplines to master. In noisy times, opinions arrive faster than understanding. Judgments are made before facts are clear. Emotions attach themselves to stories that may not even be true. For Marcus, mental clarity meant learning to separate what is happening from what the mind is saying about what is happening. He trained himself to describe events in the most neutral language possible, not good or bad, not terrible or wonderful, just accurate. This practice stripped events of their emotional charge and returned power to reason. When you name things clearly, without exaggeration, the noise fades. Reality becomes manageable again. The Stoic mind does not dramatize, it clarifies. Marcus believed that inner dialogue shapes mental health more than external conditions. The way you speak to yourself determines whether noise becomes chaos or background sound. He would correct his thoughts gently but firmly, reminding himself of his values, his duties, and his temporary nature. This inner conversation is where clarity is maintained. If you allow the mind to speak wildly, it will create confusion. If you guide it, it becomes an ally. Another powerful Stoic insight is that clarity requires moral alignment. When your actions conflict with your values, the mind becomes restless. Guilt, justification, and self-deception create constant inner noise. Marcus emphasized living in accordance with virtue because it simplifies the mind. When you know you are acting rightly, many doubts fall silent. Clarity follows integrity. In times of social pressure, Marcus woe. Remind himself that the crowd is often driven by impulse rather than reason. Popular opinion changes quickly. What is praised today may be condemned tomorrow. If your mental stability depends on approval, clarity will always be fragile. The Stoic strategy is to anchor judgment internally. You become your own witness. Your standard is reason, not applause. Marcus also warned against over-identifying with roles: emperor, citizen, parent, worker. These roles matter, but they are not the essence of who you are. When the mind clings too tightly to identity, it becomes defensive and reactive. Clarity comes from remembering that beneath all roles, you are a rational being capable of choice. When you act from this deeper place, noise loses its power to shake you. He reflected often on death, not to create fear, but to create focus. Awareness of mortality sharpens attention. Petty concerns lose their grip. Trivial arguments fade. When you remember how limited time is, you naturally prioritize what deserves your energy. This is not pessimism, it is clarity through perspective. Marcus Aurelius believed that mental clarity reveals itself most clearly in action: a calm decision, a measured response, a refusal to escalate unnecessary conflict. These small moments show the mind is ordered. You do not need dramatic silence or isolation to be clear. You need consistency between thought and behavior. In noisy times, the Stoic does not seek to dominate the environment. He seeks to master himself. Marcus knew that this mastery is the only form of control that cannot be taken away. When the inner world is governed by reason, the outer world loses its ability to overwhelm. And in that steady inner order, mental clarity becomes a way of life. Marcus Aurelius believed that one of the quiet sources of mental clarity is humility, not weakness, but an honest recognition of our limits. In noisy times, the mind often suffers from the illusion that it must have an opinion on everything. Every event, every debate, every crisis demands a stance. Marcus rejected this pressure. He understood that clarity improves when the mind accepts that it does not need to react to everything it encounters. He often reminded himself that ignorance is not shameful, but pretending to know is. This attitude protects the mind from false certainty, which is one of the loudest forms of mental noise. When you allow yourself to say, "I do not know," the mind relaxes. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Learning replaces arguing. Clarity grows in that quiet openness. Marcus also wrote about the danger of mental overextension. Trying to carry the weight of the entire world leads to exhaustion. He believed that each person has a specific role to play in the order of nature. Your responsibility is to fulfill your role well, not to fix everything. When you focus on what is yours to do, the noise of global concern loses its grip. This does not make you indifferent, it makes you effective. Another Stoic discipline Marcus practiced was mental premeditation. He would calmly imagine difficulties before they occurred, not to create anxiety, but to reduce shock. In noisy times, surprises overwhelm the mind. But when you have already accepted that obstacles are part of life, they no longer disturb your clarity. The mind says this was expected and moves forward with composure. Marcus understood that clarity is strengthened through simplicity of lifestyle. Excess desire creates constant inner chatter. Wanting more approval, more comfort, more control than life can offer produces frustration. By reducing unnecessary desires, the mind becomes lighter. Contentment quiets the background noise of dissatisfaction. The Stoic does not need much to think clearly. He also emphasized patience as a mental discipline. Many disturbances arise simply because we demand immediate resolution. Marcus believed that time reveals truth better than haste. When you allow situations to unfold without forcing conclusions, clarity emerges naturally. Patience is not passive, it is trust in reason and process. In human relationships, Marcus advised kindness paired with realism. Expect people to act imperfectly. Expect misunderstanding. When the mind stops demanding ideal behavior from others, disappointment loses its sting. This expectation management is a powerful form of clarity. You see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. Marcus Aurelius believed that inner peace is not a separate goal from duty. Doing what is right, even when it is difficult, aligns the mind with purpose. Purpose organizes thought. When you know why you are acting, distractions fall away. Noise cannot compete with a clear sense of meaning. As the day ends, Marcus would return to reflection, not self-criticism, but honest review. Where did I act according to reason? Where did I allow noise to guide me? This daily practice kept his mind sharp and humble. In noisy times, this habit is more valuable than ever. Clarity is preserved not by perfection, but by continuous self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius saw clarity as something fragile, not because it is weak, but because it must be protected. The mind, left unguarded, absorbs whatever surrounds it. In noisy times, this means confusion enters quietly and settles without permission. Marcus trained himself to act like a sentry at the gates of his thoughts. Not everything was allowed inside. This vigilance is one of the most powerful Stoic strategies for mental clarity. He believed that many disturbances enter the mind disguised as reasonable concerns. Worries about the future, regrets about the past, imagined conversations, hypothetical disasters. None of these exist in the present moment, yet they consume enormous mental energy. Marcus would bring his attention back to now. What am I doing at this moment? What does this moment require of me? This simple grounding restores clarity immediately. Marcus also warned against mental dramatization. The mind tends to exaggerate difficulty, turning challenges into threats. He practiced breaking problems down into their simplest parts. What is actually happening? What is required? What is within my power? When a situation is reduced to facts and actions, fear dissolves. The noise was never the problem. The exaggeration was. He often reminded himself that pain is not multiplied by time unless the mind allows it. Anticipating suffering creates more disturbance than suffering itself. In noisy times, the imagination runs ahead of reality. Marcus would pull it back gently, reminding himself that the present is almost always bearable. Clarity grows when the mind stops borrowing trouble from the future. Another source of mental noise Marcus identified was ego, the need to be right, the need to be seen, the need to win arguments. Ego keeps the mind in a constant state of tension. Marcus practiced humility not as self-denial but as mental hygiene. When the ego relaxes, clarity returns. You listen better. You respond instead of reacting. You think instead of defending. Marcus also understood that clarity depends on physical discipline. A tired body clouds the mind. Excess comfort dulls attention. Excess indulgence weakens restraint. He lived simply not because pleasure was evil, but because simplicity sharpens perception. When the body is governed well, the mind follows more easily. He believed that silence has a moral dimension. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Not every reaction needs expression. Restraint preserves clarity. In noisy environments, silence becomes a form of wisdom. You learn more. You observe patterns. You conserve energy for what truly matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind should be like a clear stream, not a muddy river. This clarity comes from steady flow, not agitation. Thoughts should move with purpose, not collide chaotically. When you slow the pace of your inner life, understanding deepens, decisions improve, anxiety fades. In the end, Marcus teaches that clarity is not found by withdrawing from the world, but by engaging with it wisely. You face the noise without letting it shape you. You act without being hurried. You care without being consumed. This balance is the Stoic ideal. In noisy times, many lose themselves. Marcus Aurelius shows another path. Guard the mind, simplify the inner world, return constantly to reason. When you do this, clarity is no longer something you seek, it becomes something you live. Marcus Aurelius believed that true mental clarity reveals itself when pressure is highest. Calm during comfort is easy. Calm during confusion is the real test. He wrote to himself knowing that his philosophy would only matter if it could survive chaos. This is why Stoicism does not depend on ideal conditions. It is designed for noisy, uncertain, imperfect times, exactly like the ones we live in now. One of Marcus's strongest disciplines was the ability to pause before judgment. The world rushes toward conclusions. The Stoic steps back. He delays agreement with his first impression. This pause is not weakness, it is strength. In that pause, the mind regains balance. Most mental noise loses power when it is not immediately believed. Marcus often reminded himself that nothing external can damage the mind unless the mind cooperates. Insults, setbacks, criticism, and disorder all knock at the door. Clarity depends on whether you invite them in. This idea restores responsibility to the individual. You may not control what happens, but you control how deeply it enters you. He also believed that clarity requires emotional honesty. Pretending to be unaffected creates inner tension. Marcus allowed himself to feel but not to surrender judgment. He acknowledged discomfort without turning it into despair. This balance keeps the mind flexible rather than brittle. Suppressed emotion becomes noise later. Examined emotion becomes understanding. Marcus emphasized alignment between thoughts, words, and actions. When these fall out of harmony, the mind becomes divided. Division creates confusion. Clarity comes from unity of character. Say what you mean, do what you believe is right, think in accordance with reason. This internal consistency silences many inner conflicts. In times of public outrage and constant opinion, Marcus would withdraw from argument and return to principle. He knew that debates rarely produce clarity when emotions are inflamed. The Stoic does not chase the last word. He preserves the right one. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes a powerful mental filter. Marcus also reflected deeply on gratitude as a stabilizing force. Not superficial positivity, but recognition of what is already sufficient. Gratitude grounds the mind in reality rather than lack. When the mind focuses only on what is missing or threatened, noise multiplies. When it recognizes what remains stable, clarity strengthens. He understood that the mind becomes sharper when it serves something greater than itself. Duty, service, and contribution organize thought. Self-absorption amplifies noise. Purpose quiets it. When you know why you endure difficulty, endurance becomes easier and confusion fades. Marcus Aurelius wrote his reflections not to escape the world, but to meet it well. His clarity was not passive, it was active, ethical, and resilient. He shows us that mental clarity is not fragile. When it is built on reason, discipline, and humility, as noise continues to grow around us, the Stoic path remains unchanged. Return to what you control, examine impressions, guard attention, act with integrity. The world may remain loud, but the mind does not have to be. This is the quiet strength Marcus Aurelius offers to anyone willing to practice it. Marcus Aurelius believed that the final test of mental clarity is endurance. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet ability to remain steady over time. Anyone can be calm for a moment. Stoic clarity proves itself when days are repetitive, problems persist, and noise never fully disappears. Marcus trained his mind to last, not to escape. He often reminded himself that life is made up of small moments, not grand events. If clarity is lost in small moments, it will not appear in large ones. This is why he focused so intensely on daily conduct: how you think when you wake up, how you respond to minor irritation, how you speak when no one is watching. These are the places where clarity is either strengthened or eroded. Marcus understood that fatigue is a hidden enemy of reason. When the mind is tired, it becomes careless. It accepts shallow explanations. It reacts emotionally. He encouraged himself to rest without guilt and to work without complaint. Balance protects clarity. Extremes damage it. The Stoic does not glorify exhaustion. He preserves strength so the mind can function well. Another subtle source of noise Marcus identified was impatience with oneself. Expecting instant mastery creates frustration. He was gentle but firm with his own failures. He corrected himself without self-hatred. This approach keeps the mind open rather than defensive. Harsh self-judgment creates inner conflict. Honest self-improvement creates clarity. Marcus also believed that clarity grows through acceptance of human imperfection. In Kell, ooding your own. You will be distracted. You will be emotional. You will make mistakes. These facts do not disqualify you from clarity. Resisting them does. When the mind stops fighting its own humanity, it becomes calmer and more focused. He wrote often about returning to first principles: what is good, what is harmful, what depends on me, what does not. These simple questions act like anchors in rough mental waters. When overwhelmed, Marcus did not seek complex answers. He returned to fundamentals. Complexity feeds noise. Simplicity restores order. Marcus Aurelius also emphasized that clarity is inseparable from truthfulness. Lying to yourself distorts perception. Rationalizing weak actions clouds judgment. Facing reality honestly, even when uncomfortable, sharpens the mind. Truth may sting briefly, but it quiets long-term confusion. In noisy times, Marcus would remind himself that history is filled with chaos, yet reason endures. Empires rise and fall, opinions change, human nature remains. This perspective frees the mind from thinking its moment is uniquely unbearable. Others have endured before. You can endure now. He believed that the reward of clarity is freedom, freedom from emotional tyranny, freedom from constant reaction, freedom to choose the right response even under pressure. This freedom does not remove difficulty, it gives you dignity within it. Marcus Aurelius leaves us with a simple but demanding message. The world will not slow down for your peace of mind. Noise will not ask permission. But you do not need the world to change to think clearly. You need discipline, honesty, and courage. When clarity becomes a habit rather than a mood, no amount of noise can truly disturb you. And in that steady inner silence, you discover what Marcus Aurelius knew all along. The mind, when governed by reason, is stronger than the world around it. Marcus Aurelius believed that the deepest form of mental clarity comes when a person stops trying to control outcomes and focuses instead on the quality of intention. Outcomes belong to fate, chance, and forces larger than us. Intention belongs to reason. In noisy times, the mind exhausts itself by chasing results it cannot guarantee. Clarity returns when attention shifts from what must happen to how you choose to act. He often reminded himself that anxiety is born from false ownership. We claim responsibility for things that were never truly ours to carry: other people's reactions, the future, the final judgment of our efforts. Marcus rejected this burden. He accepted responsibility only for what reason allowed: his choices, his character, his effort in the present moment. When responsibility is properly defined, the mind becomes lighter and clearer. Marcus understood that much mental noise is created by resistance to uncertainty. The human mind wants closure, it wants answers, it wants guarantees. But life does not operate that way. Stoic clarity comes from learning to live well without certainty. Marcus trained himself to say, I will act rightly, whatever happens. This mindset dissolves fear because it no longer depends on prediction. He also wrote about the danger of living mentally ahead of your life. Rushing into imagined futures pulls the mind away from reality. Marcus anchored himself in the present not through denial of the future, but through loyalty to now. What is in front of you is always enough for reason to work with. Clarity lives in this loyalty to the present task. Another powerful Stoic insight is that mental clarity improves when speech becomes intentional. Words shape thought. Excessive talk scatters attention. Marcus valued precise, honest, and restrained speech because it reflected a disciplined mind. In noisy times, silence becomes a form of clarity, not sigh. Lengths of fear, but silence of understanding. Marcus Aurelius also believed that clarity requires courage. It takes courage to stand apart from collective panic, courage to think slowly when others rush, courage to act calmly when emotions demand spectacle. This courage is quiet. It does not announce itself, but it protects the mind from being swept away by the crowd. He often reflected on the idea that nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. This observation taught him patience with life and with himself. Urgency is often artificial. When you move at the pace of reason rather than pressure, clarity stabilizes, decisions improve, regret decreases. Marcus also reminded himself that no situation is improved by inner turmoil. Confusion adds nothing useful, anger solves nothing, panic clouds judgment. Clarity, even in difficulty, is always the better companion. This belief kept his mind oriented toward calm analysis rather than emotional indulgence. In the end, Marcus Aurelius shows us that mental clarity is not an escape from responsibility, it is preparation for it. A clear mind serves better, leads better, endures better. In noisy times, clarity becomes an act of service, not just self-preservation. The world will continue to demand reaction. Marcus teaches restraint. The world will continue to provoke emotion. Marcus teaches examination. The world will continue to be loud. Marcus teaches inner order. And when that inner order is established, noise becomes distant, not because it vanished, but because the mind finally knows where to stand. Marcus Aurelius taught that the mind must constantly be renewed, especially in times of relentless noise. Clarity is not permanent. It is a daily cultivation. Each morning he reminded himself of the transient nature of the world, the limits of his control, and the power of reason. By returning to these reflections, repeatedly, he anchored his mind before the day's distractions could take hold. In modern life, this practice is more vital than ever, for constant digital and social noise threatens to erode focus before we even begin. He recognized that mental clutter often arises from attachment to praise, attachment to comfort, attachment to imagined outcomes. Each attachment feeds distraction. Marcus trained himself to detach without indifference. He did not stop caring about life's duties, he simply prioritized reason over emotional dependency. The result is a mind that observes clearly, responds wisely, and does not collapse under the pressure of trivial disturbances. Marcus also emphasized the importance of measuring thoughts against nature and reason. When the mind entertains impulses, judgments, or fears, it should ask, is this in accordance with truth? Is this under my control? Is this virtuous? Thoughts that fail these tests are dismissed gently but firmly. This filtering creates space for clarity, allowing only constructive ideas to influence decisions and emotions. He often reflected that life is brief and unpredictable. By keeping this perspective, he avoided exaggerating problems or over-investing in temporary frustrations. Every event, no matter how loud or urgent it seems, is part of a larger order. Recognizing this allows the mind to step back and respond rather than react. Noise becomes manageable when seen in proper proportion. Another key principle Marcus embraced is the mastery of habit. Mental clarity is reinforced by disciplined routines, the examination of one's thoughts, measured responses, and consistent alignment with virtue. Without such habits, clarity is easily lost. With them, it becomes resilient, even in chaos. He wrote as much to remind himself as to record philosophy for posterity. Practice is the difference between understanding and embodying wisdom. Marcus Aurelius also valued reflection on mortality, not to inspire fear, but to sharpen perception. The awareness that life is finite motivates the mind to focus on what is meaningful rather than what is distracting. Trivial noise loses weight when placed against the backdrop of impermanence. Mental clarity thrives when the mind prioritizes significance over sensation. He believed that simplicity strengthens perception. Excess indulgence clouds judgment. Overconsumption of material goods, status, or sensory pleasure fragments the mind. By living modestly, Marcus preserved the capacity to see clearly. He chose experiences and desires carefully, valuing those that contribute to reason, character, and purpose. In noisy times, Marcus would also remind himself of the universality of human struggle. Others experience fear, confusion, and disorder, just as he does. Recognizing this shared condition prevents exaggerated emotional reactions and cultivates compassion without losing clarity. It is a reminder that noise is common, but clarity is cultivated. Marcus Aurelius saw mental clarity as inseparable from ethical living. Reason, virtue, and discipline are not abstract ideals. They are the tools that steady thought, regulate emotion, and guide action. Clarity is strengthened when thoughts, words, and deeds are aligned. When character is ordered, the mind naturally follows. Finally, Marcus teaches that clarity is an active, continuous choice. Noise will never fully disappear, but the mind can remain steady, attentive, and discerning. By guarding attention, examining impressions, acting with integrity, and returning constantly to reason, mental clarity becomes a habit. In that habit, one finds freedom, strength, and the ability to engage the world without being consumed by its chaos. Marcus Aurelius closes the circle of Stoic clarity by showing that the end is like a fortress, strong but only if the gates are watched. In noisy times, every thought, every reaction, every impulse tests the strength of this fortress. Clarity is not the absence of challenge, it is the ability to remain grounded despite it. He reminds himself that the external world cannot dictate peace, only the disciplined mind can. He understood that reflection is the key to endurance. Each evening, Marcus would review his actions, thoughts, and judgments. Where had he been led by impulse? Where had reason prevailed? This practice kept the mind alert and honest. In modern life, this kind of review prevents accumulated noise from shaping perception unconsciously. Awareness protects clarity. Marcus also taught that adversity is the forge of reason. Noise, distraction, and challenge are inevitable, but they are also opportunities. The mind tested by difficulty grows stronger. Each trial becomes a chance to practice patience, measured response, and ethical action. The Stoic does not curse the storm, he learns to navigate it. In this way, mental clarity is inseparable from resilience. He emphasized that external chaos does not reduce the power of internal calm unless consent is given. Anger, anxiety, and confusion are invitations the mind may accept or refuse. Marcus chose refusal. He practiced restraint, reason, and deliberate thought. In this refusal, he discovered freedom, and with freedom comes clarity that is unshaken by circumstance. Marcus Aurelius consistently linked clarity with purpose. A mind with direction is less prone to distraction. When your actions are guided by reason and virtue, irrelevant noise is automatically filtered out. You see what is essential. You act decisively. You maintain perspective. In noisy times, purpose is the lens through which clarity is achieved. He also recognized that life is fleeting, and time wasted in mental chaos is irretrievable. By cultivating clarity, one not only strengthens thought, but honors life itself. Every moment becomes an opportunity to act rightly, to think rationally, and to experience fully. Noise may still exist, but it no longer dictates the quality of experience. Marcus's final lesson is that clarity is cultivated, not demanded. It grows from consistent effort, reflection, self-discipline, honest perception, and alignment with reason. It is an active practice, a lifelong training of the mind to see, understand, and respond with wisdom. In this way, clarity becomes a habit, an inner fortress, and a moral responsibility. In the end, Marcus Aurelius shows us that mental clarity is a choice we renew daily. The world will remain loud, distracting, and unpredictable, but the mind, when guided by reason, disciplined by habit, and anchored in virtue, can remain steady. Noise may surround us, but it cannot enter unless we allow it. And in that quiet mastery, we find the freedom, strength, and serenity that define the Stoic path. This is the final teaching. The mind, properly trained, becomes a sanctuary where clarity, calm, and purpose endure, no matter the chaos outside.